Welcome to Municipal Affairs. Last week, we spoke with Municipal Association presidents from across Western Canada about the most recent gathering of the Western Canadian Municipal Association in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. Now, in attendance were representatives from every corner of Western Canada, the Association of Manitoba Municipalities, the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, the Saskatchewan Urban Municipalities Association, Alberta Municipalities, and the Rural Municipalities of Alberta. And the host of this year's gathering was the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. Now, at the top of the agenda was funding for water and wastewater systems, the future of RCMP contract policing, and the push for meaningful bail reform. Delegates also stood united in the face of another extreme wildfire season, while tackling tough issues such as derelict properties, bylaw prosecutions, treaty land entitlements, and the push for greater local autonomy. Through it all, one theme carried the discussion, though: collaboration. Now, we are continuing that conversation from last week today with a conversation with the host organization, the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. And today, we are honored to be sitting down and chatting with UBCM First Vice President Corey Ramsey. Corey, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about the most recent gathering of the Western Canadian Municipalities Association in beautiful downtown Victoria, British Columbia. UBCM played host to representatives from across Western Canada. From your perspective as first vice president of UBCM, what was the meeting about from British Columbia's perspective?
I think from UBCM's perspective, the meeting was really about coming together as Western provinces to see what kind of advocacy priorities we can work on together. I think when you look at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, representing all of Canada can seem daunting, I think. And so really coming together as Western provinces to identify priorities we want to work on together is, I think, just a strong strategy in order to make progress on advocacy issues that might affect Western Canada and might not affect other areas of Western Canada.
So
Of
what were
Canada, pardon me.
No, understandable, but what were the priorities that BC brought to the table? Because we've had the chance to speak with AMM representatives, SUMA representatives, Alberta municipalities, and RMA. From a BC perspective, what were the priorities that you wanted to talk about when you were at that table?
Yeah, so the priorities for UBCM are really how do we support local government autonomy? That's such a huge priority as we see changes in legislation from both the federal and provincial governments. We do see some challenges to local government autonomy and decision making at the local level. You can see this in Bill 45, 46, 47 for housing legislation, Bill 15 as well that recently came out. So there's questions around how do we preserve local government autonomy, and that was again one of the discussions that UBCM brought to the table.
And were you hearing similar stories? And I know each province is going to have their own unique challenges with their own provinces, unique challenges and working togetherness of accomplishments that they can work together. But when you were speaking with representatives from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, were you hearing similar stories about the autonomy issues that they were having in their own backyards?
Yeah, there was actually some really surprising points that were brought up. I think one of the provinces, I think the point that surprised me the most was one of the provinces has legislation enacted where by they have to really have approval from the minister in order to speak with MLAs and other elected officials. And I found that such a huge barrier to just collaboration in general. And how do we advocate when we're not allowed to have conversations? I think that is such a huge challenge. And so I feel like maybe we are a little bit privileged in British Columbia to be able to have those conversations without legislation enacted to really remove that opportunity. So really just recognizing that there's challenges across the Western Canada provinces in terms of local government autonomy.
One area that I know was talked about, because I've read a few press releases from different organizations about what was discussed, but infrastructure funding is a top priority, no matter what size of municipality or where you are in Western Canada. From UBCM's perspective, what would an appropriate funding model between the federal government and municipalities, or the provincial government and municipalities, look like? And did you get a consensus from the organizations while you were there in Victoria that we want to work collaboratively to get funding from the federal government around infrastructure funding?
Yeah, there's UBCM's perspective has really been around using the model that's already in place, which is the Canada Community Building Fund. The model already exists. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is a great opportunity in order to transfer funds immediately to provinces and thereby to local governments without having to rebuild the system. That allocation might not work for everyone. Some of the other provinces might have, different ideas around how that transfer should work. And perhaps some are of the opinion, that maybe that CCBF model doesn't necessarily work for smaller, more rural communities, right? The allocation tends to be population based. If you don't have a huge population, you're not getting a large share of the pot. And so when we have, you know, I, I think of Rupert, for example, having to replace their wastewater treatment facility with a population of 3,000 people to draw on for the tax revenue to required to replace that infrastructure. It's just impossible. Like, we hear stories of, I think it's Burnaby, $1 million for 100 meters of line in the road. It's really unfathomable the amount of money required to update infrastructure. In Prince George, where I am, the average age of infrastructure is 42 years old. And someone said, "Well, that sounds really good." And I said, "Yeah, but that also means half of our infrastructure is over 80 years old." We had a project recently, I guess semi-recently, and we found wooden pipes in the ground. This is what we're
What? Wait, what?
doing.
What? Wooden
Yes,
pipes?
wooden pipes. And I told some of my colleagues at UBCM, "Oh my God, we found wooden pipes." And they said, "Oh no, we are still using some of the wooden pipes. Like we have them too." So there's a lot of aging infrastructure in British Columbia, and we really desperately need support from higher levels of government, and the current taxation system is not working. It's broken. We all know this. So we are
So,
asking for support because otherwise, it's really going to be hard for us to replace that infrastructure.
so there's the collaboration is a big word that was talked about a lot in my conversation so far with representatives who were at the WCMA event. And infrastructure funding is being a top priority for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which all organizations are part of. How does the WCMA ensure that their work doesn't overstep what is being done with FCM? Because you want to bring that Western perspective, but also at the same time, you want to make sure that FCM knows that you have your own Western issues that are coming in. Because we often hear, and I was up at the NCLGA event up in Prince Rupert earlier this summer, that it's the Golden Triangle. It's the Montreal, the Vancouver, and the Toronto that gets most of the funding because that's where the population is and that's where most people live. So, how do you ensure that the local, smaller communities get heard, but not overstep what FCM's doing to make sure that you're both collaborative on the same issue?
Yeah, to that I would say that advocacy is such a it's just a fine line. Like you really have to take care, and there are so many different groups doing advocacy that I think it's really important to have those check-ins, to have those conversations, to make sure we aren't undoing others' advocacy efforts. And so as we move forward, having those conversations, being in that collaborative space, one of the things that should be noted is that, presidents of the local government associations, the provincial and territorial associations, have seats on the FCM board. So a lot of those people in the room are sitting on FCM on the board. They understand the work that's being done there. And I think as they enter into those conversations around advocacy, they are just conscientious of the other efforts that are going on at other tables. And so this isn't to undermine FCM. This isn't to undermine the provincial advocacy as well. This is really just to support and amplify our voice to make sure that those joint advocacy items are moving forward.
One area I want to touch on just for a brief moment, if you don't mind, is this summer we saw wildfires in almost every single, and I actually let's clarify that in every single Western province, from Manitoba from to British Columbia. And if I'm not mistaken, some are still burning as we are talking, even in British Columbia. What was the topic of discussion around wildfire and wildfire management at the municipal level? Because I can imagine you heard some horror stories, whether it be from Flin Flon, Manitoba, from northern Saskatchewan, northern Alberta, and even in BC. What are you doing from a municipal perspective, and what was the discussion around wildfire management?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really just carried through the conversation over the week was that we have such gratitude for our firefighters, our first responders, those that are on the front lines to keep our community safe. Um, there's a lot of devastation around the impact that these events have on our communities. It's just absolutely devastating. And, I think we all agree that more support that can be provided to communities is better for communities. It really, to see people, elected officials and staff having these issues back home, but still making time to be in Victoria to have these conversations, I think really speaks to the importance of the advocacy that we're doing.
I appreciate that. I want to turn to the future because one thing that I often hear from residents when I crisscross Canada is, oh, these are just meetings where politicians go and drink and have fun and go out to dinner and nothing actually gets accomplished. What was the key takeaway from UBCM's perspective to ensure that your members are being told what happens at this event? What was the key takeaway for yourself that you can bring back to your community of Prince George and say, this is why we are doing this because we need to be collaborating?
You know, this was really hard work. This was elected officials in rooms for multiple days, from morning until evening. Like, let's create an action plan on how to move this forward. And, our last day was really, okay, who's owning this item? Who's taking this away? What are the next steps on this? This is, I think, a really important piece of this Western Canada group that I haven't really seen. I haven't had much exposure to FCM, so I don't really know how they, test those sorts of things out. But sending letters asking for meetings, like the communication efforts that this group went through, I think were appropriate for the advocacy work that is being done. And I actually really found it. I just had much appreciation for that space. It wasn't like your typical board meeting with really formal processes. It's like, let's roll up the sleeves and see what we can do here.
What was your takeaway?
My takeaway, there's so much talent in that room. You see, I've only been elected for 7 years, and I feel like like a toddler in a lot of ways because, some of these elected officials have been elected longer than I've been alive in some instances. And so there's so much talent, there's institutional knowledge, we tried this, it worked, we tried this, it didn't work. Maybe let's try this again. I think that that is such an exciting thing to have in a room when you're having those sorts of conversations. I love the blue sky, like throw the spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks, like what is this, what are the solutions, and then kind of fine tuning, and coming down to what we actually think is the best strategy. That is a lot of fun for me. That's my takeaway. I just was in awe the entire time I was there, hearing the conversations, hearing the different perspectives. And that's one of the things that I think really astounded me the most. We are vastly different provinces. BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, we are all different with different cultures, different identities, different richness embedded and woven into the fabrics of what makes our provinces each great. And yet we were able to come together, come to consensus on issues that are impacting us. And I think that is incredibly rare.
So the work doesn't stop now that you've left Victoria and you've gone back to your individual provinces and your individual communities. Now, I know that the next meeting is going to be happening in Alberta, from what I understand. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to announce that, but I'm going to announce it on this show because I've been told by two people that it's going to be in Alberta. So I'm breaking the news here for a second. What does UBCM now have to do between now and when you next meet with this group to ensure that the work that happened in Victoria doesn't stop?
There were action items. Each of our each of our staff liaisons that attended each took away some action items to really divvy up the work, and we're going to be working on those action items over the course. Our next meeting will be virtual, and then the next in-person meeting will be in Alberta. So
I apologize. Yes, yes. The
they do
in-person.
west to east. So yeah, I, there's some action items that will be materialized. I've already seen some stuff come back from our staff, as well as staff from the other provincial associations. And so the work is being done. It's moving forward. And, I think the next steps are really to press for meetings with the federal government on a lot of these priorities. Things like bail reform, RCMP contract policing, bylaw prosecution. There's just a lot of outcomes from the meeting that we are going to be moving forward on.
So this meeting comes at the heels, and I apologize to put this question in, but I think it's an important one as well. Comes on the heels of the UBCM AGM in Victoria as well. Are you expecting to hear what you heard at the WCGMA event in Victoria line up with what you're going to hear from delegates from across British Columbia, whether it be wastewater treatment facilities, whether it be bail reform, police funding, which we could talk about for another hour if you probably had chance to. But are you expecting to hear what you heard in that room with Western presidents, what you're going to hear in Victoria with delegates from across British Columbia?
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of flows through to my comment on just how, despite the differences in our provinces, we really see those similarities. I think BC itself is really like a microcosm of Western Canada. We see great diversity in just ideological thinking, in how we move forward. I think a lot of us know the steps that we need to take or that the outcome that we want, but it's the steps that we need to take to get there that we might differ on. But realistically, one of the things that I think is like my through line when I'm thinking about the different communities that make up BC is that we all want what is best for our communities. We all want what is best for BC. We want a province that's thriving. And in order to do that, we need support from the province and from the federal government and the advocacy on that. I don't think anyone's going to say, no, don't ask for more support. I think we're all going to be on the same page on yes, we need more support. The finer details might be, something we need to work out, but I really do think that the end line, that BC thriving, beautiful British Columbia, I think that's something we all can get behind.
So my final question before I let you go, because I'm cautious of time and I know you're a busy person and you've got many hats that you have to juggle right now. But what haven't we talked about that you want to make sure that my listeners, my viewers, the people of BC who are listening to this, the elected leaders who are listening to this from BC know about why it was important for UBCM to be at that table in Victoria?
Yeah, I guess I would say that the work is continuous. It's always being worked on. It's always in progress. Sometimes there's things that are confidential that we're not able to, speak to right away. And so it does seem that maybe there's a lag in communication, but I do really want to like share with our membership that like the amount of time our staff put into working in between board meetings is really extraordinary, and they are constantly working on building our relationship with the province to really move forward on those advocacy priorities. That is the number one thing for UBCM is, advocacy, moving forward and fulfilling the will of the membership. And so that work continues. And I am so incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to sit on the UBCM board. It really is a phenomenal organization doing incredible work for our members.
Well, I am very appreciative of your time, Corey, for sitting down and doing this. And I'm honestly excited as heck to be in Victoria in less than a week's time, meeting with members from across British Columbia. So thank you so much for doing this. And when we're in Victoria, let's grab a coffee.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and gained some valuable insights into the world of municipal politics in the province of British Columbia. Now, quick editorial note, we will be at next week's UBCM convention in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia, where we're hoping to sit down and speak with municipal leaders from across the province and hear directly from them to bring to you, the viewers, to the listeners, what the issues that are mattering most to municipalities in beautiful British Columbia. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platforms, or if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button now. Your support means the world to us. So if you can, share this episode with your friends, your family, and yes, even your community, and help keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we will be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs shortly. Till then, everyone.